1440 WROK.
Dave Schmidt, Matt Nestor, producer Tom Warner back, and we had so much fun with our first guest. We invited him to hang around for a little bit longer. Jack Gleason from hsbball.com. Go on there and check it out. Jack knows everything about high school basketball in the Chicago and the suburbs, and we always look forward to having him on. And the reason we're talking basketball is Summer League Monday night at East. They have their championship going on there, and a lot of basketball going on.
All over the place.
So, hey, Jack, if there's one school that you can predict that we're going to be shocked by this year that we should keep an eye on in basketball, there's always one school like that nobody really knows about.
I guess I got to wait for the first 2 weeks of the season.
There you go.
So I don't have a name right now, but you're right. There's always somebody. I can remember the year that West Aurora won the state tournament, which is probably around 1999, 2000. Going to see a game, and they weren't even in the rankings. And I went to see a game at Elgin one Friday night, and my poor wife got dragged along with me, and I watched it, and I said, "That is a really good team." When I got in the car to go home, I said, they're really going to do good, and they ended up winning the state tournament. So you're right. There's always one team that comes out at you like that. What does it look like in the Rockford area? Who are the four teams that are left for Monday night?
It's all Nick 10 teams, and Hononegah, and I think it's Jefferson, Auburn, and who would the other one be? I'll have to look. I got it right here. I'll look while you're talking to Matt. How's that sound?
Well, I was going to say, when you look at the area, I know one of the big things, we kind of mentioned the Freeport transfer earlier. I think that really does kind of maybe give an opportunity to change things. They had a lot of Freeport had lost their best player from last year, but they had a lot of kids coming back.
Okay.
So now when you throw in a guy who's a Division I prospect with was a pretty strong returning team, all of a sudden that does some things. I think Boylan's going to bounce back this year. They've been, you don't want to say down because they've been good, but it hasn't been your typical Boylan teams. I think you're going to see something closer to that this year. And I think a lot of people are just going to assume Auburn's going to go away because they played so many seniors last year. But, they've got guys that are going to be seniors and juniors this year that have played on, sophomore teams that either went undefeated or maybe lost no more than one or two games during the course of their sophomore year. That I think is going to really surprise some people, too.
Jack, the Final Four will be the 6 o'clock games on Monday night at East. It'll be East playing Hononegah. Hononegah looked really impressive. And Jefferson will take on Auburn. So you can tell that Auburn has kind of they had kids on the bench you really didn't get to see play a lot because they had the bunch they did, but they can play.
Right.
Auburn can play, so it'll be interesting. And they had a nice field at East this year, too. They brought in a school from Wisconsin. Janesville Craig has a nice group of kids, and very good basketball for a summer league, and a big crowd, too. That was kind of nice.
That's neat. It's a little late. I did see that and kind of thought, I should drive up there one night. I'm always worried about who ends up playing, especially once you get to July 1st because the AAU season starts.
Mm-hmm.
In June, I usually go over to Riverside Brookfield, has a really good event, usually the first weekend in June, with all the strong teams in the Chicago area, and it's really well run, really well organized. And I'll go over and watch games on Sunday, watch the quarterfinals and the semifinals and the finals. And then, maybe during June I'll go to Geneva one night and watch a summer league game. Or I think I went out to Hinckley Big Rock this year and watched one night of their summer league, just more so to go for a ride and see what's going on. But I'm always real cautious because the really good players a lot of times, especially when you're right not in the middle of June, don't show up for the games. But going back, made the comment about Boylan. Do you think Boylan's been affected by the Rockford Lutherans and the Rockford Christians of the world in terms of the private school factor, that if someone's going to send their kid to a private school, before it was just Boylan?
I think you've actually been affected by a couple of things, and one of them is absolutely that, Lutheran's rise, it has no doubt, maybe played a part in Boylan slipping just a little bit, because obviously there's players, that are going to a private school, and it used to be the only one they went to was Boylan. In fact, one of the state teams they had a couple of years ago, there's two kids that played at Boylan as juniors and actually transferred over to Lutheran, which, you would have never seen that in the past, and obviously with Rockford Christian, even Christian Life at times. I think the other thing that's played a big part in that, too, has been the rise of the Auburn program. And to a smaller extent, Jefferson and East as well have really picked up their games. Because now there's also kids, because that was really always the big thing, too, is there's always, one or two kids, if not more, from those schools that were ending up at Boylan. I know everybody was shocked, because Steve Goers was still at Boylan at the time, and everybody thought that it was going to be a cinch that Fred Van Vliet was going to end up there when he was younger, and he stayed at Auburn where he was at there, and that was really kind of the kickoff point for some of that, where a lot of those kids started staying back, and like I said, especially as that Auburn program really started to rise, you started seeing those kids kind of say, hey, we've got it good where we're at here, we can make it,
right.
From the public school system, we don't have to go there to take that next step. So I think, and maybe to a smaller extent too, some of the AAU stuff too, is that's really risen to prominence. I know it's been around for a long time, but especially like the last 10 years, that's really seemed to explode. So again, it's kind of the same thing now where, your high school program isn't necessarily as important for you to get that exposure anymore. So if you can play with a good AAU team in the summer, why do you necessarily need to go out of your way to go to that private school during the season?
And the other thing, Jack, is that Rockford brought in a new administration, because before they had talked about letting the athletics go over to the YMCA to conduct and things, and they've changed things around. They built these new field houses and stuff. And plus, when the economy went bad, all of a sudden there was some people looking at prices and stuff, and I'm not exactly sure what each school cost, but the other three started picking up some kids because of that. So there was a lot of factors in Rockford, but it sure is interesting how it's all changed our Nick 10 a little bit.
Right. No, it is very fascinating. And as you mentioned about the tuition and things like that, and especially with what's happening in the economy, when the private public school debate starts all the time about the multiplying and everything, and I have to, in full disclosure, I'm a product of Catholic schools and went to all private schools. So, but when the private school opens its door on the first day of school, nobody has to come there.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody at all.
Yeah.
But when the local high school down the street from my house opens up, 3,000 kids show up the first day.
Right.
So there's some of that. But again, I realize that the Catholic schools are using their sports, some of the big powers like Mount Carmel, St. Francis in volleyball, and other schools like that to draw these kids. But they do have to get the kids in the door. But it was fascinating to me to Boylan, and that's exactly what I thought some of the factors were. I thought the facilities, too, because I read about the new facilities and things, that kind of threw the balance of power off there. It'd be neat if Freeport was good this year to just throw a new name in the mix there. I had been up at Galena earlier this summer, and I drove back and stopped in Freeport, really just to drive past to see where Freeport High School was in Eglin.
Sure.
And so I thought, it'd be neat to see a game there some night. Which, by the way, I thought the mascot article was really neat.
Oh, thank you. Which one? The one on all the names?
Just, with all the teams. Where did Genoa Kingston come from? The Rockford East. I obviously knew about Freeport, but some of those were really, really fascinating to me.
I knew you would like that. That's why I wrote it, Jack. Thanks. That's very nice.
We had talked earlier about some of the talent, and, of course, I'm just, going off of some recruiting databases and whatnot right now. But, you look at the class of 2016, as we said, not really top heavy. I think you're getting down to the bottom of the list before you even see anybody from Illinois. But when you look at 17, you see Illinois kids kind of littered all over that. Is this maybe the kind of year where maybe the junior class makes a bigger impact than the senior class does?
That's what it looks like to me when I read the same things that you do, that's the class. They kind of compare this class, and I get my years all mixed up. There was a very weak class back maybe 4 years ago, and comparing this class to that, but the following class looks really strong. You talked about Christian Negron, and there's a lot of players of that ilk in that class. So maybe the junior class does control this year. Maybe it's a weird year where someone from the junior class wins Mr. Basketball.
Wow.
Another trend, when we just saw this explode at the NBA level, where Golden State kind of plays that small ball and shooting and things like that. Is that something that maybe you could see happen here, or is there just not enough concentration of athletes maybe to pull something like that off, do you think?
I think what that may cause teams to do is play a little bit more freeform, or coaches give the kids a little bit more, more ability to freelance. Because that's what, if you really look at it, that's really what Golden State's doing, and obviously in a very organized way. But so much of our teams now have become overly defensive-minded, especially the teams that can't compete as well.
Right.
And so they drag the clock down and really, really gum up the game is what they're doing. I've heard you guys talk about the shot clock.
Yeah.
I just don't. Yeah, it'd be a great idea, but I don't see how that works for just the reasons you talk about. It's not only the expenses, but I can't imagine even in the city where they're having a tough time keeping the scorebook that somebody's going to be able to manage that shot clock, and the refs are going to have to keep their eye on it. It'd be very difficult to do. But maybe it does, because you look at Golden State and you look at a couple other NBA teams that have been successful this year, and they have been a little bit more freeform, what appears to be freeform, very complicated basketball
right.
that the outsider, the casual observer doesn't see. And maybe it does open it up a little bit more for these kids and make it more fun. It's more fun to play like that than play 40 to 40 games.
You talk about slowing down the game, and, we have talked about the shot clock. One other thing we've talked about, because I think it was Wisconsin that was switching to this, is playing halves instead of quarters.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that and how that might be able to maybe free up the game a little bit?
I like that a lot. I like that. I saw that about Wisconsin. And are they playing... I was trying to figure out, they're playing 18-minute halves, so playing 36-minute games.
Right.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The quarter, give the team an extra timeout or something, and they can use it when they want to. But it would move the game along faster, too. I think the flow would be better. So I like that idea a really lot, and I'm really curious to see how that goes. And they're doing it just on a one-year trial period, right?
Well, when I talked to we've got a story in the interview with Deb Hauser out of the WIAA, and she said basically that 1 year was to make the ones that were doubters be okay with it. And majority of them I talked to Janesville Craig, coach, the other night. He really likes it, but they said they do that in AAU anyway, and basically in summer league they play those type of things. But she also was on the rules committee, Jack, for the NFHS, and when they made that change, she wasn't allowed on the rules committee anymore. That's one thing they have. If you don't follow a rule, you can't be on the rules committee anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, but if you listen to her, it's a very interesting interview because she really has her details done on it, and it really makes a lot of sense. So I hope they said Minnesota. The reason they did it was, Jack, is because Minnesota had been so successful with it, and a lot of Wisconsin schools were going over to play Minnesota schools that they liked it. That they all came back and said we need to do this too. So
right. No, I'll bet it's commonplace. I'll bet 5 years from now everybody's doing it, and that's a great way to make the change. To get the naysayers to say, well, we'll try it for 1 year, we can always go back the other way. And for them, you figure you're going to win over enough of them that it's not going to be an issue anymore. So, no, it'll be, I would really like to see that work, and I think that would move the game along much better.
No, I completely agree. I always go back to a game, I don't know, it was probably 5-6 years ago I'm watching, and, one of the teams that was towards the bottom of the conference, they had a lead early in the game, and they actually sat on the ball for the last 4 minutes of the first quarter because they just wanted to have a lead at the end of a quarter. And, you sit there and you watch 4 minutes of them just standing there. The other team wouldn't come out to guard them either. They're like, okay, they're trying to call their bluff. Like, if you're going to do it, let's see if you're going to do it. And, and obviously if you're playing a half that way, at least you're not going to, 4 minutes into the game, have somebody just start standing around.
Right. No, man, you're right. And I can think off the top of my head being in games like that. And, some nights I'm there and I think it's okay because the game moves along a little faster.
Wisconsin has a mercy rule in basketball. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah.
What is the...
They have to change it a little bit because it's going to be at 9 minutes to go in the game in the second half. It used to be the fourth quarter. If it was a certain weight, I didn't get all the details, but when I looked at that, I was so used to having it in football. I said, well, we don't have one of those in basketball, so I'll have to talk to them someday because there's a couple games I've been to. I said, oh, God, please get this game over with quick. You know what I mean? Have you ever been to any game like that, Jack?
Well, many times. And because I'll just, on a Monday night, I'll go see any game just to go see a game.
Right.
And I'll see those mismatches. And I do know in football, and that's great to move the game along. The only thing with basketball, when I've seen that happen, and sometimes tournaments will do that, I know Proviso did that, is that I feel sorry for the kids on the end of the bench who've been practicing every day, and then all of a sudden here's their chance to maybe get in and play, and they don't care that they're behind 45 points. They just want to play, and now the clock just goes bang, and the game's over with, and they didn't get a chance to play. So that's the only. You're right. Dave, I sit there and I go, boy, I wish this game would go along faster. And I'm thinking, hey, these kids are getting a chance. So,
Attaboy, I like you, Jack.
yeah.
We've been doing a lot of, year-end wrap-up stuff and whatnot. What was the best game you saw in person this past year?
Oh, one game that comes right to mind was the regional final at Geneva, the Geneva-St. Charles East game.
Mm-hmm.
Those two teams had, you remember that regional was stacked where they had St. Charles North, St. Charles East, and Geneva in there, and they had already played twice during the year. I'd seen one of the games, and it went right down to the end. Place was packed. That was a really neat game. I would say that both Stevenson Lake Forest games I saw, especially the first one at Lake Forest, was a really good game that I'd love to go back and watch again. Both of those games, the game at Lake Forest doesn't have a very big gym for a school of that economic standing where that school is. It's very small. It's one of the smaller public school gyms, and that thing was full probably in the first quarter of the sophomore game. They turned away hundreds of people. And Stevenson has a really big gym, and they filled that gym up for the second game against Lake Forest. So those were three really good games that I saw during the year. I'm sure there's other ones that will come back to me.
Real quick, we're kind of coming up on time here, but the other thing that we wanted to talk about real quick is the reseeding process that they're doing for the playoffs. Anything interesting you think about some of that?
I love them going back in that direction. I wish they would go all the way.
Yeah.
I wish they would go and seed the teams like they did in the sectionals 1 through 16, like they're doing in the Chicago area. And when at its height of that, they were seeding those teams, and the first 4 seeds were the ones that were hosting the first 2 games.
Right.
And I would love for them to go back to that. I don't understand why they won't go all the way. And I think when I hear the coaches and I see some of the stuff that you guys put out, the coaches say, hey, I'll drive the extra 50 miles for the game.
Right.
One game, my kids are excited. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with the IHSA with the new leadership. I'll bet we'll see a lot of subtle changes that when we look back 2 or 3 years from now, we go, wow, that was neat. I just think he's going to make some changes.
What are you drinking, Jack? That's all I want to know. I'm going to start drinking that.
Gatorade.
That's good. If you figure out the IHSA, I'll do a whole 3-hour show on you, buddy.
Well, I know that's another one of your favorite topics.
I know. They love me down there, Hey, Jack, thanks so much for being on. We'll talk to you during the year. I think you're just going to be a semi-regular guest. How's that sound?
You guys do a great job. It's got to be hard in the summertime. I know there's a lot going on, but there's still not a lot going on.
Right.
And so, I'm always happy to be on. I love to talk to you guys.
Thanks so much. We've been talking to our friend Jack Gleason from hsbball.com. I love Jack, don't you?
Yeah, he does a great job. Great job.
He's so even level and calm on all this stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, he really is. Puts his thoughts together, a lot of good thoughts on things, and it'd be interesting to see how it all plays out. I'm interested, because maybe he knows a little bit more about this IHSA guy that we do, and he could be right,
Heaven help us. I hope so.
Maybe it won't be any major change that goes through, but maybe you make a little one here and a little one there. And like you said, a couple of years from now, we're looking back saying, boy, this really got different.
I hope you're right. I really do.
Yeah,
I'm serious. Too. And if they can take care of the Chicago situation, they got a Title IX problem now, so it's a mess down there.
And if things change, that just gives us more reason to get Matt Troa on here. So
yeah, I don't know if I can. I'll have you call Matt.
I'll give him a call.
You get along good. We're going to take a time out. Be back with more of the State Line Sports Hour here on News Talk 1440 WROK.